Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Here we go. A couple months ago, I had one of the members of AmSpirit Business Connections reach out to me, which is not unusual. You know, there's some members in the organization. I talk to people from time to time, and he was reaching out just to thank me. And again, that's not terribly unusual. We're not the perfect organization, but we do a lot of great things for people with respect to helping them build professional relationships and generate referrals from those relationships. But his thanks was somewhat unusual because he shared with me a story of, you know, in the early days of the pandemic, or for much of the pandemic, really, it was probably over a year. He was sitting in isolation. You know, he went from working in a eWorks sort of a facility where he went in every day, and that kind of closed up on him, and then he's just got to work from home, and you know, he's not talking to people. There's not a lot of face-to-face. He is in a profession where it's very large ticket items, so it's not like he's not like the insurance agent who's, you know, talking to 100 people a month. This guy talks to 3 or 4 people over the course of a month. And it was just kind of weighing on him. And the notion of getting back into AmSpirit Business Connections, even though he might not have gotten referrals, just being around other people and that social facilitation was just vital to him. And he was very appreciative of it. I didn't really think about it because my life is just so wound up in connecting with other people. I take it for granted that people will always be there, and it's, you know, I hear of loneliness, I just don't experience it, and don't really see a path to experiencing it. At any rate, this leads me into today's guest, Mike Pagan. He is an expert in helping clients achieve positive mental wealth through handpicked support networks and helping them unlock significant performance improvements. His expertise includes working with entrepreneurial small businesses up through corporate boards, and he even works with professional athletes, men and women who excel in the sports, if you will. He is a coach. He's the author of 4 books, and he shares that he's a little bit different. He's not your standard guy. He can be blunt, direct, honest, and open when necessary. He's from the UK. I expect nothing less. But his company provides inspirational and challenging coaches and world-class facilitators for peer support and mastermind groups and master classes. Mike, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Frank. And I love that story about your contact there and the issues of isolation and what's happened through lockdowns and COVID and everything else going on there. But one of the things I just add in on that is isolation was around a long time before the lockdowns came along. What it did was previously a percentage of the population knew about isolation because they might have been at the top of a multinational organization with thousands of employees and nobody they could talk to around them, or they were genuinely lonely and isolated elsewhere. Through lockdowns, 97% of the global population has been affected by isolation now.
Yeah.
We now know what it feels like and how it works. And for me, I believe isolation kills creativity and prevents decision making. And then as a detrimental effect off the back of that, that can then have an effect on our mental health. So we need to have those good people around us as a strong way of working to combat the challenges surrounding ourselves by isolation and what that causes.
Yeah, you know, again, it never really dawned on me. It obviously, you work in this world, you see it all the time. You know, for me, I'm a relationship networking type person. I am surrounded by people who are either well connected and want to do better with those connections, or maybe not well connected, but aspiring to be well connected. And it never dawned on me that, okay, there are people out there that are really neither. I deal in a small business world where you got to meet people to survive. It never really dawned on me. Certainly I never thought about the corporate executive, the CEO who has nobody to turn to. I get it. I get it now. I can see what you're saying, but I thought the big concern with the COVID lockdowns was just people's profitability, but apparently
no,
not.
because you're then forced and cut off, and the area that concerns me, part of the greatest going forward, is the hybrid working that we now have, which is good. I like it from that perspective. However, for Gen Z and millennials, when you're sitting on your parents' spare room bed with a laptop on your lap, a cup of tea beside you, your mum popping in and out, the cat and whatever else, you're not learning via osmosis of the role models around you. And it's certainly not a professional arena where you're going to do your best work. And it's understanding where young people are getting isolated now going forward, because the hybrid world does work for them, but doesn't always work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And things like that, we really need to appreciate how to get the right environment for each individual.
Yeah, you throw out the term a mental wealth team. You want to elaborate on, because
what does that mean?
Well, no, I mean, it's certain, I don't want to say, well, it's probably unique. I don't hear it all the time. We hear wealth. We think of wealth. We think of dollars and cents, pounds or euros or whatever.
If you consider the language of mental health, I'm not a mental health expert. I'm not a counselor. I use people like that and I plug them in where necessary. But a lot of the time, mental health is seen through the lens of negative, because it's associated with depression, anxiety, and suicide and other challenges that come with it. The counter opposite can be called, therefore, mental wealth, because that's the strength. Think of it as a yin and yang environment.
Yep.
But the wealth there is about having great people. These are people who we can rely on, that will ask us better questions than we will of ourselves. And I regularly work with individuals and organizations, and I challenge them to sort of understand who has got their back at the moment and drill into that support network. And is it fit for purpose for the way forward or not? Right. And you alluded earlier to the work I've done with professional athletes when they're transitioning to their sport, to life after their sport. And for them, it's this guillotine comes down. Yesterday they had 35 people, keeping them in the pool, on the track, on the pitch, whatever it is.
Right.
The guillotine comes down. Those 35 people are no longer fit for purpose for their way forward. And they become isolated very, very quickly because who are they? Where are they going? Who's got their back? Now, all of us throughout our lives, whether it be from being at school, going on to colleges, going on to first jobs, apprenticeships, moving in with a partner, and so on, we are transitioning repeatedly throughout our lives, which means that our support network needs to be refreshed on a regular basis so it's fit for purpose going forward. Just because somebody was good for us 3 years ago doesn't mean to say they're the right person going on now. We need the 2.0. We need the 5.0.
Right.
And that's the mental wealth team. When we have great people around us proactively supporting us, we can make braver decisions. We're going to have a lot more fun, which is priority number one of life. We want to be enjoying ourselves. And it doesn't stop things going wrong. But when things do go wrong, we can put the wheels on more effectively.
Well, I mean, there's a saying out there that we're the average of the 5 people we hang around with most.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there's some truth to that. Well, I mean, there is truth to that, not some truth. There's absolute truth to that, because there's all sorts of studies out there that if you hang out with people who smoke, you're more likely to smoke. I mean, we have this influence, and that's just one example. We have this influence on people. It's obesity or working out or just being positive or whatever it is. To what extent do you work with your clients on choosing who to have in who to have in their networks. Because I mean, if somebody's isolated, you might feel like, geez, I'll take anybody. But I don't know.
It's a gradual process as with your networks and the relationships and the connections. We don't suddenly go from 0 to 47 in a week.
Right.
So it's being intentionally selective of the people we want around them. And so I'll talk about self-care. I'm obviously a fan of coaching, but the coaches will ask the external viewpoint. They'll call us out on our self-sabotage and our procrastination. And those are, if we don't appoint those people, then nobody's got the permission to do it. If we make sure that we're number one in our world, rather than, I always joke that I was number 6 in my family, sort of wife, 3 kids and a dog.
Mm-hmm.
And this time last year, it was number 14 because there were 8 puppies as well. But that another story for another day. But it's that whole knowing when we're looking after ourselves, right? We've got coaches challenging us. We've got a professional network that take away those emotionless questions. So I know I've made some serious errors in my business career at times when I haven't had the right people asking me questions because they read the small print that I didn't, or I didn't understand, or whatever else. And then on top of that, you've got the mastermind environment where you've got peer support groups that are just totally confidential. Openness, honesty, and vulnerability is a precursor for being part of them, and accountability to the things you say you're going to do afterwards. And we can create those groups ourselves, or we can join somebody else's that are working. And off the back of that, then that gives us more people putting us in the hot seat, asking us better questions than we can of ourselves, and then holding us accountable to it. And it's just such a powerful medium. But just in those 4 areas I described there, self-care, coaching, professional network, and mastermind teams, we can go from having 1 or 2 people who've got our back to 10 or 15 very quickly. I'm not saying overnight, but we build up to that. And then as we appoint somebody into our team, right, we need somebody else who's a specialist in X or Y. Well, because we've got a trusted network there, we now leverage off those connections, and it changes the way we play.
It would seem to me somebody going from maybe not total isolation, but a sense of being isolated, to trying to find people around us that, I don't know, it's kind of like when you're drowning, right? You're grabbing for anything that's floating, right? Mm-hmm. And I just wonder if you run into, to what extent you run into a situation where you're getting them moving and they're grabbing for the wrong piece of driftwood, right? That person is and that must be a hard conversation for you to have. It's like, well, wait a minute, I have a friend now, you're telling me to jettison this.
It's a slow process. But when people understand sort of a baseline of today of who they've got, and I work quite often with solopreneurs in the coaching and training world and others, and they're sitting there and they think they've got lots of people around them, but then they realize actually nobody's truly got their back. They spend their whole time giving, mm-hmm. helping, doing for others, but not actually looking after their own strengths and their own support. And it's just that pause button. Let's ask better questions of the people around us. And if they're not right, then I'm not saying dump them and run away. Mm-hmm. It's just they're not actually the right person to be asking those inside questions and helping you through the network and develop who you want to be.
No, I can see that definitely being an issue. There are certain things that I can go to my franchisees for support with, for guidance. Mm-hmm. And then there are certain things where it's just not a safe space.
Yeah.
Because they're conflicted. They're not, I'm not saying they're evil or anything, but it's self-serving, right? It's
absolutely,
hey, should I pay you guys more money? Well, what do you think the answer is going to be, right?
No, no, discount it more, please.
It's just, that's not a great example, but you understand what I'm saying. And so it's,
but it's taking these opportunities. An example I give you, which is runs very much into your leveraging relationship and connections. Bear with me a second. So my father lived in Singapore in the late 1950s and early 1960s. He was heavily involved in the cricket club out there, which, if you know, Singapore is quite a significant space in the middle of town. He didn't play, he was an umpire, but he was a bachelor and he worked hard at being an expat bachelor in Singapore. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
His best friend left Singapore and moved to Bangkok and set up a logistics business. He moved back to the UK, met my mother. 2 months later, they were engaged. A few years later, my sister and I came along. In 1999, which was best part 30 years later, he sent a Christmas card to his friend in Bangkok to say, Mike is moving to Australia. He's going out with his wife and his baby. Just the Christmas update letter it was. This chap is on the phone, and this is before ease of phone calls around the world. And you've got to tell Mike to meet up with my friend Newton in Australia, in Perth. We did some land deals in the 70s. He's a top bloke. If he can help out, he will. Fast forward, I'm out in Australia. I've been there a couple of months. I go and knock on this guy's door. He's in this palatial house in the middle of the smartest park. And this little old guy comes to the door, opens it up and says, come on in, mate. Feeling a little bit crook today. Just had my first dose of chemo. But let's see what we can do to help. And long story short, he was considering investing in a .com business that was getting going. They didn't have commercial skills, so he plugged me in. I joined that company, took golden handcuffs and a pocket money income, and I worked with them for 3 years before I then moved back to the UK with my wife, baby, and 2 kids by that stage. I was then bought out 3 years later after that from that company, and I set up my business, which has now been going 20 years in the world of coaching and support and facilitation. Newton died 3 months after I met him. I had a 3-month window to meet up with this chap who changed my life. He does not know he changed my life, but as a result of the introductions and the connections he set up, I changed my path, I changed my whole setup, and I do what I do today. Indirectly go one step further. My father drinking and partying in the late 1950s and early 60s in Singapore at the cricket club indirectly changed my life 30 years on. So
yeah,
this is the power of the connected network.
Yeah,
we have these little opportunities and windows of relationships and connections. They may not be quite as globally extreme as I've just described, but I had literally a 3-month window, and that changed my life. And it was just taking the connection, making the calls, and making it happen. I could have just not bothered to ring that guy. And this is the same when you look at your connections and how you work and how you work with your team and your franchisees. This is what is so important. We get these small nuggets of opportunities, and we have to take them because you don't know where they might lead to.
I think that's a very powerful story. I tell people all the time is where you're standing today was set in motion by something you did years ago. And so often people get caught in the habit of trying to calculate every move. I need to meet this person because they're going to be a game changer for me. And they pass up this other opportunity that I don't know where that's going. But I say often the less obvious things are probably the better path, because the obvious ones don't always seem to work out in my experience. Yes, there are the stories that are out there, but there's a story of a less obvious path. You know, when you get to Perth, talk to this guy about what? You had no idea.
No idea. I didn't know what, never met, never seen, no connection there at all, apart from a tenuous 30-year-old relationship, which it worked. And for me, it's just knowing how those connections can really come off and how they play out. And we need to have people asking better questions and then trusting their advice. My wealth management company that I work with, when my father and my father-in-law both gave out that advice when I was younger, never work with family and friends. Yeah, it's a regular statement that's made, because when it goes wrong, it gets painful and ugly.
Right.
We know that the fallout can be. However, my father's legal and financial support was his father and then his brother, who took over the family firm. My father-in-law's best mate ran his legal firm and his financial firm that he was invested through and whatever. So I'll just say, the two males, patriarchal world that I used to live in, their advice was never do this, and they were both doing it. It's just knowing where those connections are.
Right.
When the advice is given by those professional sectors, here's the opportunities. My guys quote back at me, said, you've always told me, you've written about it, Mike, you take the advice of the professional people you appoint. So why are you second guessing what I'm doing? Because it's human nature. I wanted to research. No, I've told you do A, B, or C. Why are you coming up with Z? Or Z, sorry.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears here a little bit. Let's talk about your business and how listeners might help you. What would be a good referral opportunities you're looking for? That would be worthwhile for our guests.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, my world is broken into three simple areas. I speak at conferences and events, face-to-face or virtually nowadays. And that's talking about the mental wealth team and how we get the right people around us. I then will provide coaching, and I plug in coaches into that field. And then the rest of it is all through peer support groups and masterminding. So I've got a mastermind group at the moment that just launched last month. And there's a lady from South Africa in Cape Town, another in Toronto, a gentleman in Mumbai, another lady in Jersey, one in Ireland, and two in the UK. So it's very diverse, really exciting. I've got and I'll be launching another mastermind group in January. And it's just helping people, as per the description on masterminding, is total confidentiality, accountability for what they say they're going to do, openness, honesty, and vulnerability. And it's such a powerful medium. And hence I'm a very big fan of it. And hence I run the groups regularly all over the place. And
are the groups limited in size? I heard 7-8 people. Is that?
Yeah, that's where I get to. I don't go bigger than that. If you've got 7 or 8 people, then there's always going to be somebody who's away having their hair done that day or whatever it is.
Right.
There's a reason that somebody. So you need that diversity within the group, and that number means everybody can get to know each other closely. Yeah. And they meet up in between sessions, and they're chasing, and these teams get closer and closer. One of the famous stories of a friend of mine, a member of a mastermind group, he sadly had a terminal cancer diagnosis given to him. And before he went home to see his family, he went to his mastermind group and discussed what was positive, what was negative, what he could do, what he should do, where he had to get more information and advice and support, so that when he returned to his family, he had a clear headspace and he could deal with all the emotional challenges that were going to be ahead. And I know it might sound quite cold, that process, but for him, it's what he needed, so that he was able to deal with everything as powerfully and as comfortably as was going to happen for him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it sounds cold. It sounds, it sounds smart. I mean, you're going into, family's going to be emotional in that situation.
Oh yes.
And somebody's got to be the calm mind to say, okay, here's the path forward. It's my life. It's my final days. This is how I think this needs to be. You're all going to be, you all need your moments. Take your moments. And if you want to amend this, certainly, but cooler heads, people who had nothing really at stake here, have kind of said, hey, this is the best advice. So, all right, positive mental wealth. Mike, I really appreciate your time on the program today.
No, it's good. Just a sort of a closing call to action, I would say.
Yeah.
I always get people to review who they've got in their support network around them, so that they can have more fun. And if we get this right, and it's understanding who's there. But the other one is, it was this time last year, fortunately, one of my son's friends was unsuccessful in a suicide attempt. The morning after this happened, I had a phone call at 10 o'clock in the morning, UK time, from one of my best friends that lives in Pennsylvania. And I said, before we chat, Bok, just explain to me, why have you rung? And he said, that's not a very polite or happy response. I said, no, there's some stuff going on over here. I need to know why you've rung me at this point. And we spent several minutes digging, and it was purely, he just felt, I haven't spoken to you for a little while. I need to pick up the phone. He was ringing at 5 a.m. US time on his way home from work. He's the head of A&E at a hospital in Pennsylvania, in Bethlehem. He knows everything, obviously, about the medical side of things. I was able to talk to him about my son's friend, what was going on, what he'd done. He was still in a coma at the time of this conversation. I could then share that information with my son, this young man's twin sister, and their parents. And so this story, I was able to share so much information and knowledge that in an emotionless, free environment, that they could then take on board and understand what was coming up and what was going forward. And the reason for the phone call was just a simple bit of gut feel. I need to reach out. So my call to your listeners now is for those of you who've got a gut feel, you haven't spoken to somebody for a while, or you haven't been in touch, or they're just off the radar. Do not tweet them. Do not high five them on social media. Do not just do some randomness like that. Pick up the phone. If you live close enough, go and see them, because you do not know what is going on in their world. That just that extra reach out from somebody they've not spoken to for a little while could make all the difference. And if we get this right, one of my total objectives of mental wealth and the work I do here is to change lives and potentially save a life. And if we can do that by that one phone call, then the job is done.
Powerful story. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on here, Frank. It's been good fun, and I'm enjoying your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.